Welcome to another episode of Raidercast in partnership with Tomb Raider. I'm Chris, and today I'm joined by co-host Neha from Crystal Dynamics Tomb Raider social media team. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Really good. I'm very, very excited about today. Been looking forward to this for ages, and I'm so excited.
I'm excited too. I've gotten to speak to Noah plenty of times before, but I've never actually really spoken to Jason that much. Only like once.
Cool. So, in celebration of Tomb Raider Legend and Anniversary Month, we have some special guests from the development teams who we invited to chat about Lara's mid-2000s adventures. Shall we dive in? So, please welcome Jason Botter and Noah Hughes. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Please, could you briefly introduce yourselves and your roles in making Tomb Raider Legend and Tomb Raider Anniversary?
My name's Noah Hughes. I'm Studio Creative Director here at Crystal Dynamics. I've been working on Tomb Raider since Tomb Raider Legend and work closely with the development team, but also bridge that dev team to brand vision and franchise management side of things.
I'm Jason Bada. I'm principal designer at Crystal Dynamics. On Tomb Raider Legend, I was the lead technical artist, which was the first time we actually had that title in the studio. And then on Tomb Raider Anniversary, I was the creative director.
So from the moment it was made clear that Tomb Raider was in your hands, what were the first steps?
For us, it was a very exciting moment. I remember I got a little bit of a heads up from the head of studio, and it was very exciting. But the thing that was new for us is working with a property that was not a new IP to the studio. So one of the things we wanted to do first was really immerse. I mean, obviously as gamers, we have played Tomb Raider, but there's a certain depth that you want to understand the material before you start making it. So that's something that we dove into, and I think we'll look at some content, but part of that was just playing around with the character in the world and doing some very early prototyping against that.
Oh, we recently saw some of that stuff. Some things that Megan managed to uncover was a lot of like really early gameplay footage, and it looked amazing. There was some really, really cool things going on there. How did it feel to be in that position of being able to like revamp the series?
I mean, I know from my side of it, it's incredibly exciting. It was an honor to have the opportunity, and it was certainly something that was a challenge we wanted to rise to, that we knew what we were working with was something very special, and there was a sense that we really wanted to do it justice.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think that was definitely it. Like, we were all big fans. We knew there was a lot of pressure on us to live up to the expectations of all of the, the history of the franchise and the love that people had for the game and the series. And so just to do our best, and then also to bring it forward, to invent the next chapter in Lara's history. I mean, she was, she had such a, she had many games before we took over the franchise, and so it was sort of continuing that tradition and always trying to, bring Lara into the forefront of gaming again and take her on her next great adventure. So it's good times.
That's really exciting.
So Chris mentioned all the footage that Megan has been digging up, and we released like a lot of beta gameplay videos. Were there ever any thoughts to simply continue within the same timeline as the previous 6, or was the reimagining of this series on the cards from early on?
We looked at both directions. I think we looked at picking up the story a bit closer to where it had left off. And we also looked at stepping back a little bit and looking at the franchise across media. And I think in the end, that's what we ended up doing, is realizing that as much as the games were the foundation of the Tomb Raider experience, that we had a lot of people that were familiar with the films and came into falling in love with Lara Croft through the movies as well. And some of what we did was try to take a step back and unify those two lenses into Lara's world, and pick up a little bit farther away from where Core had left off, as an opportunity to really start a new chapter in Lara's story with everything that came before it in mind.
Fantastic. Yeah, Angelina Jolie had such a big impact, like on the series, on the character. It's just like one and the same for a lot of people still today. I think when they see Angelina Jolie, it's Lara Croft. It's brilliant.
Yeah, amazing casting on that one.
Yeah.
So talking about those early days, could you tell us about maybe some of the early suggested storylines that didn't pan out for one reason or another, or just like some jokey ones that were sort of thrown around back then, if you remember any?
Man, you remember any? No, I can't remember any other ones. I mean, the only thing I remember is that we very early on wanted to make it, a much more emotional journey, right? Which is why we, ended up making, a lot of it about her mother and her family. Like, I know that was a big thing for us. I think there was, I can't remember what was sort of the exact specifics, but, we wanted to bring more of an emotional connection to the character, because I think even, we've talked about it in the past, but like how Lara had been sort of very, she'd sort of been a character that was very aloof, and we wanted to sort of bring more of a connection for players to be able to relate to her as a heroine, right? So I think that was, a big thing for us. But do you remember any specifics of the narrative itself?
I mean, I think probably looking at that continuation of the series from where it left off, we had played with that a little bit more. And I think one of the things we realized was that it felt like Core wanted to go someplace with that, and it felt like we couldn't it's almost like we couldn't do it justice as newcomers to the franchise. So there was this space around that was enticing to dig into, but also was a little bit intimidating. So I think that was something that we played around with a little bit.
Cool.
So can you talk us through some of Lara's early designs, from her appearance in Angel of Darkness through to Legend, and the decisions which guided her creation?
Yeah, I mean, I taking the character visually was a similar approach, which is starting with the elements that made her great to begin with and trying to really retain those, but bring them forward. One of the things that was particularly exciting is we had Toby Gard came on board as someone who could help us work with both characterizing Lara on a narrative front as well as visual designs. So in some ways that gave us more confidence to evolve those Lara designs, and it was actually super fun to see Toby sketching all of these possible visions for Lara's visuals. And I know Cam, you who talked to this much better, has been our Lara artist for forever now, and did some amazing work trying to take the same aesthetic that represented that character from a feature standpoint, but bring it closer to a human representation. Obviously, we've taken that farther in some of the more modern games, and Legend sits kind of in the middle there, where she still retains some very exaggerated features, the intense eyebrows, the seagull lips, the long slender face, and the legs. We always one of the things that we realized is her knees are very narrow. That it gives her legs a very long look, but it's just another aspect of her features that are exaggerated in some ways. So our goal was to make her high fidelity and both in her movements and her visual to really come to life as a character. But it is interesting when you're trying to take such extreme features and blend them with human proportions. And so it's one of the things I like about the character design in Legend is it sits squarely in the middle there.
Yeah, the thing I like about it too is I think it harkens back to her first outfit in TR1. Like in AOD, they had, in Angel of Darkness, they had gone pretty far with, like, if you compared that Lara to, you know, her original instantiation in TR and in the original Tomb Raider that Core had made, they were, you know, they couldn't be farther apart, right? And so part of, I think, the thing that I always enjoyed about the Legend character design was that it sort of called back much more closely to the original. I mean, you can see them behind you, right? That the anniversary, and which, you know, was once again, you know, derived and based on the Legend model, but still I think has a lot of the core components with the holsters and the shorts and the tank top, right? And we just sort of took those sort of elements and made that part of the core redesign. So that was the part that I liked. It made her, in my mind, feel very adventure-y, and I think that was a big part for us, was getting back to that sort of, you know, adventure-y, out in the wilds feeling. I mean, from the opening scenes where she's, you know, going along the cliffs and near the waterfalls. Like, I mean, I love that intro to the game. So
it's an iconic start to a game, I think that is.
Yeah.
No, the other thing that reminds me of looking at Chris's background is her gear became very important for us in this chapter as part of that, taking on these extreme environments. And so the grapple, obviously a signature element, but you can see her character design itself was meant to showcase some of that visual aesthetic of being well equipped for the journey.
So Lara's a really British character. Was it a challenge to reimagine her with a team on the other side of the world? What was that like?
Yeah, that's something that is harder for us as a studio to find people who can be that lens against, are we doing it right? Fortunately, we were still, IDOS had headquarters still in the UK, so we had a lot of people on the publishing side who had a long history with Lara. So in addition to having Toby locally, and other obviously fans of the series locally, also having that connection and having a review process through the UK was valuable for sure.
You did already kind of mention Toby. You mentioned, like, you know, getting to see his sketches and stuff like that early on was really fun. So what was it like otherwise working with Toby, and how early in the development was he brought on board?
He was brought on fairly early. I don't know if Bada, you know exactly when, but I do remember.
Around Legend,
yeah, we were making those character designs and early concepts. So he was definitely there early in the process. And yeah, I mean, what's it like to work with Toby? Toby is, he's probably one of the creatives I have learned most from. He really is. You think, does someone get lucky with a game like Tomb Raider, and you meet Toby and you know that it wasn't luck, that he really was, and the whole core studio itself was an amazing a group of talented people. But Toby definitely is a creative genius when it comes to character design and characterization as it relates to story and character arcs and things like that. So for me, it was always it was great to be both learning about what went into making Lara, but also just learning about what goes into making great characters and great stories.
That's really nice.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, he was already at the studio on Legend. So at the start of Anniversary, which came immediately following, he was there from the outset. So like we were working hand in hand on story, and all of everything in Anniversary was, you know, both of us from the beginning.
I guess it's kind of like his baby.
Yeah, it was definitely his baby. I was like
the
stepfather.
As terrifying as it was to make a sequel to a core game, to to reimagine a core game as Bada did was particularly intimidating, and that was another area where at least having Toby there right by Bada's side gave him that extra insight and gave us all confidence that we could do it with respect and credibility.
That's good.
Yeah, I think it gave me the freedom too to try things and know when I'd gone too far on the design side or where we were trying to push too far and change too many things. He would sort of definitely, be like, I don't, this isn't even, this isn't not close to what we were doing, and I feel it's pushing too far away with the character. So it was a really nice sort of, he was a good litmus test of like, hey, this is the right thing to do, or we're trying to do something too far. So it was really nice having him there, and I think it gave us the freedom to experiment and change the right things and not be afraid that we were gonna offend anybody. So it was invaluable.
And he had a few things that he, maybe wished he had a little more canvas to get into the game. So he came with sort of that sense of getting a second swing at that story, which was cool for him too, I think.
Knowing the sort of things he wanted to add to it, I guess. Oh, okay. So the concept of Lara as a character sort of changed from originally being more of an anti-hero to being in Legend more in line with the sort of Hollywood hero. We read a little bit about this. I think it could have been yourself, Noah, who was talking to Megan about it for her 20 years of Tomb Raider book. 5 years ago now, blimey, that's fast. And so what was the sort of some of the decisions behind this? There's an ongoing talk at the moment. Some people are surprised other people think of Lara Croft as an anti-hero. Where do you sort of stand on that?
Yeah, this is one that we spent hours and hours talking about. We had multiple creative directors at the studio working on Tomb Raiders simultaneously, and Toby as well. And those conversations about what really makes Lara tick are sort of foundational to consistency across stories. And this is probably one of the hottest topics. To be honest, the way Toby describes Lara as nearly a villain, like it almost goes beyond anti-hero and really pushes her to that limit. One of the things we realized is that not everyone took that from all of those stories, that there's actually a degree of interpretation of how much, what her motivations are. We had nerdy conversations like lawful good versus chaotic good versus
Lara Croft in Dungeons and Dragons. Let's do it.
That's right.
And even crazy hypotheticals like if the street urchin stole a key that was the only key that could open the door to save the world, would Lara shoot the street urchin in order to get the key before the world ended? And it is through exploration of those things that we realized one of the things that we did want to retain, even as we cast her in a very aspirational light, was she will do whatever it takes in order to take on the burden of responsibility that she has, because she understands the scope and stakes of some of these mythical, supernatural elements in our world, right? And because no one else can save us from that, she does have that necessity to go all the way in order to do that. So we did want to make sure that we retained an element of her living outside of the natural law, or at least the civil law, because she was governed by something more important than that. And that's sort of where we found that middle ground where people's interpretations could both apply on some level.
I like that. It's a really poetic way of putting it. That's a really good answer.
You touched on this a little bit, just kind of mentioning that you brought Lara's family into the picture for Legend. So just what led to this decision, I suppose?
what led to this terrible series of events. No, just kidding. We get lots of family feedback. So in some ways, some of that did come from the movie, but more of it came from what Jason was saying. Was we wanted to understand who Lara was as a person like you or I, that she's extraordinary and she's different than you or I in so many other ways, but we wanted to see some of the parallels and say, what is it like being a Lara Croft? And when you start juxtaposing that to more relatable elements like family, you start to render different facets of a character. So I think it was that element that was probably motivated it most.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially with a character who is so sort of focused and driven along one train of thought, you need to sort of, I think, be able to understand the limits of what stops her from crossing that line from, like, you know, hero or anti-hero into villain. And so by providing that depth through the familial connections, we can sort of help players understand emotionally why Lara stops herself from crossing that threshold, right? Because she's always teetering on that edge of, like, her obsession going too far, right?
Yeah, no, I think some of my favorite moments throughout the series have always been those sort of will she, won't she moments as well. And there's a really good one of those in Anniversary, when Natla tempts her with everything and she's like, no.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Moving on to a little bit more in terms of the control schemes and development of Lara's movements. The feel and fluidity of Legend differed greatly from previous Tomb Raider titles up till that point. Can you talk us through some of the technical innovations that you made to create this game?
Oh, man. I mean, I know for us, we, you know, looking back at where Tomb Raider was prior, you know, the big thing was really a really great tool set that we had, where we could sort of blend all of our animations and develop a movement system that sort of allowed for really fluid and detailed animations, because we were, I mean, I'm pretty sure the model that we were using at that time, we were pre-calculating the jump distances and the connections prior to, like, as soon as you press the button, the game knew, okay, she's going to connect to this ledge. Okay, she's not going to connect to this ledge. And so what that allowed us to do is to do really fluid animation that could reflect sort of what was going to happen, because it wasn't like we were just waiting until the moment that you ran into the wall to play the attach animation. So it gave us the ability to have much more fluid animation, much more believable sort of actions and preemptive actions and reactions to her movement as she went through the world. That was just, you know, credit to our great engineering team at the time, who, developed that system for her movement, and then developed some great animation blending tools that allowed us to create, I think, at that point, which was the most fluid Lara up to date, right? And obviously we've continued to push that moving forward, but that core technology, I think, has been, we've used it on every Lara since then, right? Pretty much.
So previously for Angel of Darkness had taken a step towards motion capture with mocapped cutscenes. What were the benefits of going back to hand animating everything?
Yeah, I'm sure some of the artists could speak to this more, because there's probably multiple facets to this. But I do think that there was an element related to what Jason just talked about, which is the fluidity combined with responsiveness as a goal. And we've come a long way with motion capture technology. So we have a lot more tools to achieve those goals within motion capture. But one of the things we really wanted was the players not to be waiting around for animations to finish, and those blending systems. And part of the blending systems, they chew through frames And part of what you're trying to do is hit these signature poses. So I think in a lot of ways, it allowed the animators to create a more fluid and responsive Lara that still hit very iconic poses. And it goes anywhere from, her core moves, but also just the signature flair and things that she could do, that she could branch from one animation into any number of animations. And this gave, no matter what, I think the artists were doing a lot to make sure that those blend paths worked and worked quickly and responsibly for the player, and ultimately looked smooth. That fluid movement was one of our core pillars.
Yeah, pretty much it. Yeah, fluid movement was one of the pillars of the game. So making sure that she was always looking and feeling great and responsive was, I think, it was definitely one of, I think, the best technical achievements we made in the game, and it was reflected in how she felt to play.
Wonderful. Taking you back on a very general journey to 2006, or slightly before 2006, what was it like during production? Can you tell us about some of the best moments and biggest challenges that you had to overcome during development?
Oh man, I know on Anniversary, one of the biggest challenges that we had to overcome was just the timeline. It was sort of, because it was a game made for the 10-year anniversary of Tomb Raider, we needed to come out 10 years after the original. So we had a very short timeline because we had just wrapped Legend, and then there was this sort of small window of time where we could make the Anniversary as a sort of reimagining / tribute to the original Tomb Raider. So that was, I think, the biggest hurdle, was just the timeline. It was very truncated compared to Legend. Thankfully, we had a great starting base with everything we had just done. So, along with the help of the team up at BuzzMonkey, we were really able to, I think, crank out a very, as I think it might even be larger than Legend Anniversary, as far as game size, in a very short amount of time with a pretty small team. So
yeah, that's really impressive. Like it's like, I think it's like twice the size or something.
Yeah, it's pretty massive. I blame Toby for that one, for making the original Tomb Raider enormous. And we cut so much. You are probably familiar with the original Tomb Raider and how big it actually is. It is massive, the original. So even in Anniversary, which was twice as big as Legend, we still probably only did, I don't know, I would say a quarter of the size of the original Tomb Raider. It's really huge.
Wow. No, it's still a massive achievement. Like, yeah, blimey.
I think some of the things on Legend, some of the wins for Legend were early on to some extent. That one, I think a few moments that capture Lara in all her awesomeness, things like the Tiwanaku climb and doing that cartwheel up, and there's just something about her climbing that sheer face and doing it with such grace, that it was very exciting to capture that Lara very early in development. And then other moments like the waterfall in Ghana, doing that swan dive off the waterfall, and just the big reveal of secrets behind the waterfall that you were just dying to explore. So capturing some of those moments, but then we really had a commitment to, early on in the game, to achieve an amount of player choice and experimentation. So we had the physics system as something that allowed us to do puzzle design a bit different than we had in the past, and it was exciting to play with those physics elements within puzzles, and even to the extent of giving multiple solutions for puzzles, having the elite, I forget what we call them, the gold rewards or something, but
yeah,
the ability to really deliver some new facets to puzzle design was fun for us early on as well. So those were a couple of the wins that I think helped get our legs under us early.
Yeah, once the physics system came online and we were able to sort of create these analog puzzles, I really think that it motivated the team and sort of inspired everybody to see like, oh, how far can we really push this, and how, you know, how complicated can we get?
And those dynamic elements in combat too that you see in some of those early videos, whether it's shooting an element in the environment or pulling it down with a grapple, really trying to make sure that the world was dynamic in puzzles as well as ambient ways.
Yeah, I do remember the headaches from all the physics puzzles too. I mean, anytime you give players analog control over anything, I mean, the amount of bugs that you can create in situations they can get themselves into is, you know, it's sort of almost infinite. So we always had a fun challenge trying to create the sense of ultimate freedom, but then, you know, not make a game that you could break. So it was very
the
challenging.
other part was players' expectations about that too. I remember one of the hardest things to grasp was that Lara herself had weight, whether that was standing on something, hanging on something, or swinging into something, that her being a physics object was sort of foreign to players. It wasn't as common back then. So it was one of those things that, depending on the player, it often took them a little while to realize that Lara was a physics object in the world.
Were there some things you wish you could have included in the game which didn't make it through to the end product?
Once you sort of got the idea that Lara was going to wield Excalibur, there was a fairly large scope version of that, which ultimately we didn't end up doing. But I do remember that was one thing that our ambitions for how Lara interacted with that weapon was something that could have gone farther, but in the end served its place.
Was there debate on having like another level where Lara had it? Because I think she had it for like the end of the Nepal section, and then obviously during the huge final fight as well. Was there going to be other levels as well?
I think it's the length of it was tailored to the functionality of it. So it was new mechanics, but it was a limited enough set of new mechanics that we took the amount of time to explore that we needed to the extent that it had more mechanics, we probably would have had more runway with it.
How big was the team in comparison to Legend for Anniversary, and how did the development differ?
I can't remember exactly how many people were on Legend, but it was definitely larger than the team that we had on Anniversary. I think the core team for Anniversary was around 30, 35 people, and that was split between Crystal and BuzzMonkey in Oregon. Yeah. Or no, Washington, I forget where they were, but somewhere up north that I went to several times. Yeah, so we had split the team up, and they helped us out in sort of most facets of the game. A lot of on design, but also engineering. And then there was a lot of support from different groups within the organization, cinematics and concept and stuff, that were people like Crystal that were sort of shared resources between everyone.
It was definitely a lean and mean team. It was,
yeah.
And I think there was a lot that was difficult about that, but I know one of the things I admired about you guys is that it was the leads team was very close and collaborative, that I think there was really good communication and a sense of ownership that came from that size of team. So it's definitely impressive what the team was able to achieve, and I think part of that was just working really good together as a group.
Yeah, we were all huddled in sort of one section of the old Crystal building, and there were just sort of like a few rooms, and we were all sitting right there within 15 feet of each other for almost the entire development cycle. So, you know, anytime we had a question or there was, you know, debate about something, we would just sort of like roll the chair over and then be like, hey, what's going on? And then sort of talk it out and then roll back. And, you know, the team was super talented. Everybody that worked on Anniversary was great. I felt, I'm not going to lie, a little privileged. I got to take sort of all of my favorite people from Legend and make Anniversary, while they were sort of developing a lot of the next version of the engine and the tools and everything for Underworld. So it was great. I mean, I had a bunch of super smart artists had a great design sensibility, and a bunch of designers who had, worked amazing with artists. So everybody got along really well. Everybody contributed. We had a great democracy for almost all the decision making, and it was super fun. It's, I think, still probably my favorite development.
That sounds like such a great team. Sounds like really cool.
Really good.
So going a bit more into Anniversary, it's often called a remake, but in many ways it's more of a reimagining of the first game in Tomb Raider. What are your thoughts on that, and how was that approached during development?
I would agree. I would say it's, for me, I would definitely consider it a reimagining, not a remake. We obviously went back, played through the entirety of Tomb Raider multiple times, and then recorded it so we could review all of those playthroughs whenever we needed. But definitely it wasn't a one-to-one remake. As I was saying, the original Tomb Raider is massive, and we just didn't have the team size or the timeline to rebuild everything one-to-one. And I don't think we really wanted to either. We were coming from a different Lara with different moveset, different abilities, and we knew we needed to update all of the puzzles and the layouts and everything to reflect the current version of Lara that we had built in Legend. And so we couldn't really do that if we just sort of put a level of polish on what was there before. So a reimagining.
Yeah, that's actually, I remember early on we ended up using that word specifically to communicate to publishing and others to really understand the intent of the game. And I think part of that, again, we talked about having Toby there, and that gave us a little bit more confidence to be a little bit more aggressive with that. We also had, as I had mentioned, we had some canon gaps between the core games and our games, and in some ways the Anniversary Edition interpreted some of those differences in a retroactive way to reconcile some of the through line. Our intent being ultimately get back to a sense of continuity between these games.
Yeah, and like Noah was saying, we wanted to sort of bridge the gap with what we had done previously in Legend, because Toby was there was a lot of things that he had wanted to get into the original story of Tomb Raider that didn't come across as well, or he just ran out of time and couldn't get into the game. So it was an opportunity for us to sort of imbue that, the more narrative and some of these gameplay ideas into the game on the second go, as it were.
So I know you mentioned, obviously, you talked about how the original game was massive, and you said, I guess you covered like a quarter of it. So how did you decide which areas to keep and which to remove from the original?
Yeah, it was really, I think, pinpointing the rooms and the spaces and the gameplay sequences that resonated with us and really stood out. They had, that were iconic and had sort of unique architecture or, signature gameplay moments, whether that's against certain enemies, like, the T-Rex, or, like the reveal of the waterfall in Peru with the giant gears, or, even like St. Francis Folly in Greece, those sorts of things. We knew we need to sort of play on what would be the things people remember if they had played Tomb Raider 1, and make sure they included many or all of those things back in to the original. And so once we had sort of gone through, played through the original, we sort of had a big list that we just started listing out all of the spaces and the sequences that we thought were important, and then we just, and then took those as inspiration and then built out the new game from there.
I'm going to ask a super, super geeky question, and I don't know if it's something that's going to be able to be answered, but it's something that's been playing on my mind for the longest time, and I really hope someone can answer it. I've always wanted to know about T-Hoken's empty tomb in Tomb Raider Anniversary, because did you intend to bring him back at some point in the future? And was he intended as the culprit who was sealing ancient rulers in crystal in Legend. You had the Queen of Tiwanaku, you had King Arthur, and then you also saw Tihocan sealing Natla inside a crystal. Was that a deliberate, he's the one doing it? Or was that just oh, there are these people who can do things with crystals?
Noah, do you remember? I don't remember exactly. I wish Toby were here to answer that question.
One of the things I will say is that we do look at the Atlantis thread as sort of core underpinnings to the franchise. So those characters do have roles in the background, and it's exciting for us to have the opportunity to weave some of those things in. But I think for it, we can't speak to specific intent in that context.
Afraid of that.
What were some of your proudest moments when it came to making these two games?
For me, I mean, being on Tomb Raider, I think just in general was such a huge privilege. Like, that was so amazing to get to work on it as a franchise, and having worked on it for the last 15 years, it's been great the whole way through. I love Lara and Tomb Raider. I would say for me, the proudest moment was just getting Anniversary done. It was so hard. I don't think I slept for like a week as we were trying to but
Speaking of hard, my proudest moment?
Which one?
Beating that pyramid level you built.
Yeah, it's the level that I've gotten the most flack on over all the years, was that the going up the giant pyramid, the wall runs in the Lost Mines. Yeah. I don't know why I made that so mean. I remember when we were developing it.
Just admit it.
I don't hate players. I remember we were making it, and the designers kept coming back, and they'd be like, "All right, we retuned it," and I would play through it, and I would just be like, "I don't know, it's still easy." I think we had just been playing so much, and I had gotten so good at it that my perspective was very skewed. We built the game in a linear fashion, so by the time we had gotten the Lost Mines was the last levels that we built for the game. And I think I'd just gotten so good at that point. I just kept playing that and being like, I don't know, it's not hard. It's so easy to get through this. And then afterwards, everyone was like, you're insane. This is like the hardest thing I've ever done. So sorry to everyone that got stuck there. It was not intentional. It's an accident, sorry. It's okay. Absolutely my fault, because I'm the one that kept telling everybody to make it harder. I remember that.
Well, it's flexed.
Oh, goodness me. To finish up, do you have anything that you'd like to say to the biggest Legend and Anniversary fans in the Tomb Raider community?
I mean, other than just thank you for being fans and continuing to support the franchise and come on this journey with us. I mean, it's been amazing to work on. Like I said, I felt privileged to carry on the Tomb Raider tradition. And I'm just happy that everybody's still playing Tomb Raider and still getting enjoyment out of it. I mean, that's sort of, for us, the whole point of making games, is that people can find something that they enjoy and relate to and continue to enjoy it for years and years. So thanks, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks absolutely to the fans. And we have a lot of people giving us feedback of what direction to go with the game, but the fans that have been with us and Lara for that long are really experts. They're as much experts of the franchise as we are. So we do listen. And if you love those games and there's things you like, things you missed, or things you want to see, we're all ears. That we feel so grateful to be able to make Tomb Raider games, and we want to make Tomb Raider games that you guys love.
That is a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you, Noah, and thank you, Jason, for taking the time. And all the best in the future. And thank you for everything you've done for Tomb Raider so far.
No problem. Thanks. Have a great one.
Cheers. Thank you, guys.